Hi guys, we're here today to talk about discrete trial teaching, pivotal response training, and incidental teaching. And these are three of the main methodologies to use with children with special needs and all fall under the ABA umbrella. So as you guys are homeschooling your children, I know the how do I teach my child question is coming up a lot. So let's start with discrete trials, which are really the most researched way to teach children with special needs. And there even was research in the 80s that said you could really reduce the signs of autism using discrete trial teaching. That's been debunked a little bit, but it still is the most popular method for teaching children. So it was popularized by Lovaas in the 60s out in California, UCLA. And what we do is we present the student with a discrete, unique trial or their opportunity to respond. It's very controlled. The environment is controlled, the materials are controlled, and there's a high degree of stimulus control, which can give you some positives and negatives. The positive discrete trial teaching is kids learn a lot faster than any other methodology. The drawback is it's hard to take the skill from the one-on-one small setting and make it useful in the bigger world. So for example, discrete trial would be clap hands, that's the SD, that's the instruction. The child does this, that's the behavior. Good job clapping your hands, high five, that's the response, that's the consequence. But taking that to clapping your hands on if you're happy and you know it can be a little challenging. So the first thing we do is we establish attending behavior. Look at me, Jimmy. Then there's that SD, which is the fancy way of saying instruction. So clap hands would be that instruction. Then we prompt if needed. If they do it independently, no prompt needed. If you say clap hands, they're not clapping your hands, maybe you're pulling their hands up, maybe you're giving them a model, maybe you're setting them up. Then there's that student response, and the consequence for the response is either the reinforcer, high five, I love the way you do it, or that error correction if they do it incorrectly. And then there's that inner trial interval, which is the time between trials. So you don't necessarily want to do clap hands, good job clapping your hands, clap hands, good job clapping your hands, clap hands, good job clapping your hands. You might need some time in between those trials. So for attending behavior, we want them visually looking at you, listening to you. Before you give the instruction, make sure you have their attention. If you're giving the instruction, they're over here going to play, they're not going to respond to you. Make sure you have their attention first. If the child's not attending, use some type of reinforcer to get their attention before you begin. So when I was a preschool teacher and I had some very challenging students, I would put a toy, whatever they were working for, on the top of my head. They would immediately look at the toy, go, all right, clap hands, good job clapping your hands, here's the toy. But I was using that toy to get their attention first. So that instruction, the SD is the stimulus that elicits the target behavior. So saying clap hands elicits them to clap their hands. When verbal directions, it should be clear and concise. It shouldn't be, Jimmy, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do this like this and clap your hand. No, it's, Jimmy, clap hands. If it's a do this with an object, you want to show them the object. If it's ring bell, you want to show them the bell. Or it might be the sound. You know, the bell, the timer ringing is the SD for going and checking your schedule. That prompt, it ensures a correct response so the behavior can be reinforced. So saying clap hands is not the prompt. That's the instruction. When you say clap hands and then you say clap, that's then the prompt. Use more frequently when you're teaching a new skill. When the child doesn't have the skill yet, you're probably going to be prompting a lot. As the child develops the skill, we should be fading those prompts. Aim to use the least intrusive prompt possible. So if the setup, if pulling their hands up a little bit can get them to clap hands, don't fully hand over hand have them do it. We want to use the least intrusive prompt possible. So here's the prompt hierarchy, which I think a lot of parents and a lot of teachers, unfortunately, have never seen. So the most intrusive prompt is a physical prompt. Then we have a verbal prompt. And a lot of people might say, but a verbal prompt, that's so non-intrusive. I'm just telling them what to do. Yes, that is true, but a verbal prompt is always dependent on having you there to give the verbal prompt. It's the hardest to fade away. Positional prompt would be if you want them to discriminate between, we'll do this, touch pillow or touch phone, and the goal is for them to touch the phone, I'm going to put the phone close to them and the pillow far away, and I'm going to say touch phone, and they're more likely to grab the phone because it's closer, and that's using a positional prompt. Gestural prompt would be touch the computer and you're tapping on the computer to cue them in. Visual prompt would be stand up and you're holding the picture of stand up. And independent is just they do it. That's the accepted prompt hierarchy that we use. So again, that independent, no help was given. They did it correctly on their own. You should be showering them with reinforcement and praise. Visual prompts, they answered after a picture was flashed or shown as a cue. Some type of visual medium assisted with the student. That task strip, washing their hands and there's turn on the water, get soap, runs for 20 seconds. That would be a visual prompt. Gestural would be the response occurred after a point or a wave, some type of gesture from the adult, but it's not the full action. So do this, clap hands, and then you're clapping your hands. That's the full model. Do this. That could be that kind of gesture. Positional, we went over that, but you put the correct answer closer to the student, or if your child always grabs what's on their right, then you put the correct answer on their right to get the right answer. Verbal is when the response follows the teacher saying the answer or the parent saying the answer or saying part of the answer. So what is this? It's a cookie, say k, k, k. There's that verbal prompt. It's the easiest to use because you always have your voice with you, but it's the hardest to fade. And avoid using verbal prompts if there are other cues that can be effective. The rule I've always taught my teachers and my parents is if the behavior you want your child to do is a verbal behavior, then you can give them a verbal prompt. So if you want them to say cookie, that's a verbal behavior, you can give them the verbal prompt. If you want them to open their lunchbox, that's a non-verbal behavior. The prompts that you should use should be non-verbal. That model. The child's response follows the adult demonstrating the whole action or a peer demonstrating the action. You must have the student's attention before giving a model, and a child really needs to be able to imitate for them to be able to use model prompts. And that physical is any type of physical assistance, hand over hand, partial physical, anything that involves touching the child in that regard is a physical prompt. And then there's just incorrect. The child didn't respond or responded with the wrong answer. In general, we try to avoid getting incorrect responses. I'd rather see a prompt to the right response than letting the child get it incorrect. We don't want them to get used to making mistakes. If there's no response, we provide the prompt. If you get the incorrect response, remove the materials and represent the trial using a prompt. So how do we fade these prompts so that we don't end up with some learned helplessness? We can use least to most fading, which is wait each time for the student to complete the task independently. Then we go to a gesture, then a partial physical, then a full hand over hand. That's really good for like hand washing, getting dressed, those types of skills. Then we can use time delay. You could give the answer immediately after the instruction. So what is this cookie? Oh, good job saying cookie. And then we could say, what is this cookie? That's right. What is this cookie? And we give the prompt after longer and longer amounts of time. And that's really good for verbal programs. So that child response, the child emits the response. The likelihood of that response occurring again is determined by the consequence. If they get praise, if they get reinforcement for that response, they're going to give that response again in the future. If they don't, they're probably not going to do it. The child's only going to respond based on learning history. We want to teach each response is a mini assessment of where their skill is, and you must be prepared for all child responses. So what are those consequences? Those are the events that happen to the individual following his or her response. So it could be reinforcement, it could be nothing, or it could be representing. So how do we do DTT, discrete trial teaching? It can be presented in mass trials. That's when we give all of the same skill in one block. Clap your hands. Good job clapping your hands. Oh, clap hands. That was awesome clapping hands. High five. Clap your hands. Whoa, that was great. Clap hands. It could be distributed trials. Skills are interspersed with each other, but still presented in that drilled format. Clap your hands. That was awesome clapping your hands. Touch the spoon. Oh my God, you found the spoon. What is this? Car, you're right. Touch your head. That was beautiful touching your head. That's that distributed trials, interspersed. And then we have embedded trials, trials that are embedded into more naturalistic situations. They're my favorite. They take a little bit longer for the child to master the skill, but they're more natural. They're going to use it quicker. So the embedded trial would be, instead of saying stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down at the table, you're in circle time and you want the child to come match their name on the check-in board. Jimmy, stand up. Good job standing up. Put your name on the board. That's embedded in the natural circle time routine. You want to take data on a trial by trial basis. Every time you give that trial, you want to take that data because you want to see if we're making progress or not. And there's lots of repetition for discrete trial teaching, lots of opportunities to practice the skill. We know our kids need that repetition to learn, which is why DTT tends to get the fastest results. It's always important to use powerful reinforcers, especially when you're starting to teach a new skill. Important to make self and activity a reinforcer. You don't want to have what I call discrete trial voice. Clap your hands, Jimmy. Good job clapping your hands. What is this, Jimmy? You're right, it's a cookie. You want to make it fun. Oh my God, clap your hands, beautiful, clapping your hands. What is this cookie? Oh my God, you're amazing. You need to be animated with our kids. That's going to help decrease that task avoidance. And it may be necessary to assess the reinforcer. What you're using for your child needs to work for your child. You might use one reinforcer for one activity and not another activity. And you're going to vary it. You don't want your kids to get bored, satiated. You might use chips in the morning, cookies in the afternoon, iPad time, swimming, running, whatever it is. And you always want to pair the reinforcer with praise. Good job clapping your hands. Here's the cookie. I love the way you stomped your feet. Here's the iPad. But you want to tell them exactly what they did to earn that, and the praise should always come first. That way the praise gets paired with the iPad. Over time, you can fade out the iPad, and now praise itself is the reinforcer. You always want to reinforce all attempts at communication. Rather than shaping successive approximation, reinforce all attempts to get what they want. We might use a token system and then use those primary sensory or activity-based reinforcers. Use whatever's working for the child. So this is where we're going to leave off for today. I hope you join us tomorrow for the second part. It will be a 4-part series. Stay safe, everyone. See you tomorrow.